People consciously or unconsciously measure those four things in us: that our intentions were good, that our integrity was real, what we see and it's what we get, it's a real thing. We do have the capabilities. We're either highly skilled or we're not, and then we can bring the results.
Welcome to Lessons in Leverage, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of success. We'll help you unlock the secrets of leverage so you can amplify your impact in the world. Here's your host, Spencer Lowe.
Welcome back to another episode of Lessons in Leverage. Today, we're thrilled to have Scott Carley here with us. Scott is a dynamic consultant and motivational speaker who's energized leaders and CEOs in 9 countries and all 50 states. As a Vistage trusted advisor and 2-term president of the National Speakers Association in Austin, he's known for turning stagnant organizations into innovative powerhouses. Scott's fearless approach and commitment to excellence have made him a transformative force in leadership and organizational renewal. And he's not just out there helping big corporations and huge, groups of people, but he's helping individuals to get what they want out of life. And so, Scott, I wanted to dive right in with you and just kind of ask one of the questions that I think a lot of people deal with, which is, why are so many of us scared to set these big, ambitious goals?
Oh man, that's a great question, and it's one I deal with all the time. It's not always that people are afraid of failure. There's a lot of people that are afraid of success. And, sometimes the first thing that comes up, well, what if it didn't work out? What if I failed? What if my money ran? And what if people didn't show up? What if I fail? And there's a lot of people that say that, but then there's a lot of others who think, oh my word, I don't know if I can handle the success if this thing really blew up like I'm predicting that it will. And both of those are a rush that we have to deal with. And the more you do it, you get a little better at it. But I'm a big believer in setting big, scary, audacious goals. And if you set a goal and it doesn't scare you, you set one that was too small. I know we're starting off really quick with some stories, but I'm in a blended family now, but originally I just had my 2 daughters, and my youngest daughter, well, all of us, we went to Six Flags in New Orleans. I think that's right. And my youngest daughter, she was maybe 6, and they had a big wooden roller coaster, and I love roller coasters. And so we climbed into that, and we put the 2 girls, I had a 6-year-old and maybe a 9-year-old. We put them in the front car because we wanted the front car. And then my wife and I sat right behind them. And so the roller coaster started, click, 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 click. And it got to the top. And my youngest daughter looked over the edge and went, "Oh, Dad," and started climbing out of the roller coaster. And we grabbed her, and we had to hang on to her for the whole roller coaster ride, even though it was just a matter of a couple of minutes. Oh my word, we were scared to death. She was scared to death. And so when we finally got stopped and she got out and she just shaking and we walked, out the gate and then finally, out to the main lane of Six Flags and she took a bunch of deep breaths and she said, "Oh, Daddy, that was really scary. So where's our next roller coaster?" And to me, I just grabbed and I said, "You're a Carley. That's right. You are a Carley all the way, because you're not afraid to take chances and to ride some big, scary, audacious thing." And I just think that's a big part of the thrill of life and business is go for it.
I love that. And I think, there's such a powerful effect in just what meaning you put to things. And the fact that for her, and clearly based on how you raised her and in your family, there was meaning behind that fear that wasn't, if something's scary, I should not do it. We can have these scripts and these beliefs that are like, if it's scary, I shouldn't do it, or it means it's bad. And your story, if I'm hearing it correctly, was more of, if it's scary, it could be fun. It means that we get to conquer a fear. It means we might grow. And I was blown away. I had a similar experience with my daughter. I've always had a big fear of heights. And we went to this water park and they had one of those ones where you have to get inside the enclosed thing and the floor just drops out. My daughter's barely tall enough to even get on it. In fact, when she went up there, she's too small. And I said, they said she was tall enough. She's only 6 years old. And so they checked her and like, it's right on the edge. It's fine if she wants to go. And she gets in, and I was too scared at the time to get in. And so I was but I didn't want to condition her. So I just said, if you want to do it, yeah, go ahead. It's going to be great. And so she gets in, they close it, she drops, she goes through the whole ride. And I get down to the bottom. I take the other slide, and we get down to the bottom. I said, well, what was it like? And she's like, it was so scary. Can I do it again? And I was like, she has a different meaning. She had that naturally. And the thing is, sometimes it's natural, sometimes it's taught, but that meaning we put to things can either empower us to go do great things, or it can hold us back and keep us locked into this paralysis. So when you're working with folks and working with an organization, how do you start to root out those people that maybe are stuck with either bad meaning on something, or stuck in that paralysis? How do you kind of identify that? And how do you get them out of that state and into a more bold state, ready to go attack those goals?
Well, that's also a great question. And they're everywhere. And sometimes it's because they, have natural fears and trepidation about doing things. Sometimes it has to do with their personality type. And I use a tool called the Fascination Advantage personality type. And when I'm able to isolate why they're thinking the way they're thinking, then I can approach them based on that to help them take the steps towards something innovative and new or scary that they've never done before. People who have trust as part of their fascination profile, that is the language of stability. They want things stable. It's not broke. Let's not change it. Everything's okay. When I hear that, and now I know where they're coming from, I can say, well, let's improve on what is stable. Let's keep it fresh and let's update it. Get a bit of a new coat of paint. Let's add something to it. It's like spice. And so then people are much more likely to move forward. Now, let me say about that also, if somebody does have that, they're not the person to put in charge. It's usually somebody like me or you who's going to lead the charge with this, oh my God, what are we doing? Because that's our gift. It's not everybody's gift. But if we can hold their hand and get them involved, then they're much more likely to come along with the party. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. One of the patterns I've seen, I think it's a really high leverage skill and pattern here is, as I've interviewed a lot of people with different backgrounds, there's this common thing of whether it's a certain personality assessment. I've talked to people who use Clifton Strengths. I've talked to people who use the 6 human needs, who use all these different frameworks to understand people. What I think the real superpower pattern in what you just described was, you're starting with empathy and understanding the people on your team. You're going to where they're at, what matters to them, what their skills are, what their personality is. So often I can see in companies, and even mistakes I've made at times, where we start with like, I want you to understand me. I want you to get on board with my vision. I want you to adapt to me. And the problem is they don't see the world the way you see the world. They might not be looking at it through the same frame. And so that pattern that you just laid out, I think, is so critical for people to understand. When you start with that empathy of understanding their skills, their personality, how they see the world, and then you help get them, you bridge that gap from where they are, how they see the world, to your vision, then you unlock real change and real power. And if you skip that step, they're going to be scared to cross that chasm. It's going to feel like a big jump.
You unlock it in them. I haven't always been very good at this, but I am an avid reader and I'm a learner. I have curiosity. And, Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things he talks about is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I found that really helps. And so I ask curious questions from people who are maybe in opposition or have reticence or are digging their heels in about something. And once I understand where they're coming from, then I can address some of those things to relieve their fears. A few years ago, I was elected as president of the National Speakers Association, the local Austin chapter. And it was very intimidating. I've been a speaker for a long time, but it was very intimidating to be in that. I'm surrounded by people who are very high level speakers and doing great. And they sent me to a thing called Chapter Leader Institute, where we learn about other chapters and how to run a good chapter, and they come up with the 5 M's and blah, blah, blah. So I came back to my local chapter, and what had happened is during my visit at CLI, I looked around the room and I noticed that out of the 36 chapters around the country, we were only one of 2 that wasn't having our meeting on a Friday or a Saturday. Instead, we were having it, over lunch, and it was a luncheon. It wasn't a 3 or 4 hour training session for professional speakers. So when I went back to our chapter, we were sitting around the boardroom, and I wasn't officially president yet. And they said, well, Scott, what did you learn? And I said, well, I learned a lot of great things. I saw the best of the best. And one of the things that I learned was that we were only one or two of 36 chapters that didn't have a 3 or 4 hour meeting to really help our speakers in their business. And so I'm going to be promoting that we move our meeting from Tuesday to Saturday. And man, you could have heard a pin drop. And they were not happy at all with my idea. And so over the next hour and a half, we talked about it, and I just listened. And in that hour and a half, Spencer, they themselves pulled it around to maybe Scott has a good idea. Maybe we've missed something that we should have done. And so between then and when I officially became president, that's what I did. I went around to the people that were in opposition or had real reticency, and I just listened to them. And then I found new board members that were on board with my idea. And I would ask them, are you on board with this? No, I'm not. Okay, well, I'll check with you later. And that meant I didn't want them on my board. And when I became president, we moved that meeting to a Saturday, and it changed everything. So you ask, what do I do with people who are reticent and don't want to jump on board? Have a conversation with them, and I find out where they are. And I'm a big believer in casting vision. Without vision, the people perish. I love to cast vision and then say, let's talk about where you are in this vision and how, what contribution you're going to make to get us where we want to go. I love doing that kind of thing. It's great.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's a fun process. I think the listening skills are so important, making people feel heard and being able to get them on board with the vision, getting that, again, crossing that gap. The vision's here, they're here. I love
if people feel heard, they'll lay down their swords. If people feel heard, they'll lay down their swords because they want to know that I was heard. And then we can decide what we want to do. So I try to do that. I do want to hear what they have to say. Doesn't mean I agree with them. Doesn't always mean that they're going to change my mind, but I want to make sure they're heard because I need their agreement. I need them on board.
Absolutely. Another thing that came out in what you just shared, that story, is this idea of really a very high leverage pattern, which is, where do I go to find these best practices? Where do I go to get the right mentorship? So I'm not just coming up with a vision out of nowhere. I mean, sometimes visionary people will do that, but more often the best vision is coming from maybe a combination of some of the best insights from other industries, from other leaders, from competitors, from collaborators. And so, I love how, as I listen to that story, before you're in the role of being the leader, before you're making the decision and casting the vision, there's a preparatory learning process there that involved going and learning from your peers and being self-aware enough to say, if all these other people I respect are doing this, maybe there's something in there that I could learn and apply. Tell me about that pattern in your life. What are some strategies and some ways that people can follow that pattern to identify maybe mentors or groups they can learn from? What have been some skills that you can help the audience with on that so they can do the same thing?
Yeah, there's 2 real simple answers to that. My dad gave me some advice when I was pretty young. I say pretty young. I was a teenager, I guess. And this is what he said. My dad was an engineer. He was an electrical engineer. And he said, I guess he was a mechanical engineer, but he worked for Westinghouse. And he said, if you want to learn to be a plumber, don't ask an electrician how to do it. Go to the people who are doing what you want and ask them how they got there. I never forgot that. That was some of the best advice that I ever had. Because what I did from that day forward, I found people who had what I wanted, and I asked them how they got there and tried to find ways to hang around them. So one of the things that I do when I'm doing a leadership retreat where we're casting vision or setting goals for the next year, I'll get with the CEO or the key leader, and I'll say, each one of your department heads, the assignment that I have before I ever get there, each one of your department heads needs to reach out to a company or an organization that is 5 years ahead of y'all in their production and in what they're doing. Somebody who is 5 to 10 years ahead of y'all, bigger than y'all, maybe not twice your size, but significantly bigger, and talk to the leader in that division. And not necessarily your competition, but just talk to that leader and ask them questions. What are y'all doing now? How did you get here? What roadblocks did you face? How did you overcome it? How did you pull your people together? What are some ideas about what you're doing now? Because when we get together in that leadership planning and that vision casting time, I want them to already have tapped into something that somebody has already done that's ahead of us. And it's great. I mean, they come in with ideas and people look around and they'll say, man, I never heard you talk like that before. Well, I'd never reached out to a company and tapped into them and found out what they were doing. Man, they've got great ideas. And it just feeds the energy in the room. It's great.
I love that exercise. I got some feedback from a coach at one point that I needed to do a similar exercise, and I got so much value out of it. I think one of the things that holds people back from doing that is what I call shooting at invisible targets. And that is, they know they have this vague idea of where they want to be, but they haven't actually defined in clear and definitive terms what it is, what the goal is, what the outcome is. And because of that, they don't really know who the right mentor would be because they don't know what the outcome is that they're looking for.
Well, yeah, there's two things that come to mind. I'm a reader. In the book, Think and Grow Rich, one of the things that he talks about in just very quick in the book is you need to know what your burning desire is and where you're headed. I used to tell people in setting goals that your brain is like a guided missile. And if you give it a target, it will work night and day to hit that target. But if you don't give it a clear target, then it spins in circles and goes around and around until it runs out of fuel because it has nothing to go for. So having a very specific target is really important. And you just pick one. And on the way, if you decide, hey, I think we're going to change targets, it's okay. I mean, it's not okay to change all the time, but when your brain and your heart has a vision of where you want to go and a target, it will work to get you there, and other people will work to help get you there.
That's such a powerful concept. And I think when you just highlighted that idea of the importance of picking one, I've seen that people will have a fear like, oh, but if I pick the target, then I don't have any options anymore. And in my experience, the opposite is true. It's exactly what you just said. You actually will open up more options by moving in a very directed fashion towards a very specific goal. You will learn more, you'll advance more, and you'll uncover more than if you never commit to that clear target. And so once you've committed to the clear target, then you start to see what's possible and you have the opportunity to make calculated changes to that target over time. Is there any advice you give or exercises you do with leaders to help them get clearer on the target and just make that first decision? If they're feeling that paralysis of, well, what should the target be? I don't know. There's a lot we need to do. We got to get better operationally. We need to get more cost efficient. We need to grow faster. There's just so much to do. How do you help them get clear on a target that will allow them to see maybe where the right mentors are or who's 5 years ahead when they're considering kind of who to reach out to?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. One of the things that I do is that I've done in like priority management workshops is I'll say, okay, what is an income producing activity? What is an income producing goal? Show me something that you can do that brings in money. And usually business are in business to make money. And so we ask that's the first question. And so once you get really clear about this either makes me money or doesn't make me money. If it makes me money, it becomes a priority. Does it make me money? It may not be a priority. So that's one of the first places that we start. Second thing would be, what is keeping me from making money? So what is the EOS system? I really appreciate the EOS system that was Entrepreneurial Operating System by Geo Wickman, I think. They inserted something into their plan, and that was dealing with issues. Because they realized that when companies just sweep issues under the table and they don't want to talk about employee issues or production issues or work issues or whatever it is, then it really creates a backlog, it slows everything down. And so that's another question that I ask. Okay, what's keeping you? Why are you not being able to go after your goals? Why are you not being able to punch through something in particular? And it takes people a little while before they actually can articulate what really is the cause. And when we get those down on paper, and this is another thing, if you can't write it on paper, you can't deal with it. You've got to be able to write down on paper what is keeping you from doing something you want to do, and then put it out in front of some people, brainstorm about it. Well, when we do that, then we can deal with, well, we got production issues. Why do we have production issues? Well, we may have the wrong people in place. We have unmotivated people. We have old systems, old tools that aren't working and are constantly under repair. It could be that our marketing, one of the things with our National Speakers Association in Austin, we didn't have a marketing department. We were struggling to grow. We didn't have a marketing department. And I said, why don't we put a marketing department together and put somebody over that? And immediately things begin to improve. So does that answer your question?
It does. I think that's a really good answer. And I think it can be really powerful to be able to identify these key constraints, like you said, these issues. You certainly can't sweep them under the rug. On a personal level, how have you seen that same principle play out? Because, on a personal level, there's maybe, if you think of revenue producing as personal growth and you think of those issues as maybe things that are holding you back, how do you think about personal development through that lens?
I'm a big believer in personal development. I mean, I'm a business coach. I have a MBA mastermind where people come every week and we work on continuous improvement. There's a couple of things. Number one, if a person's not a reader, then get Audible or get in a book mastermind. Probably the single biggest thing that I've done in general that has changed me was about 10 years ago. I was invited to a book mastermind. And in that mastermind, they pick a book. We each read a chapter, and each week when we get together, we talk about what that chapter. That mastermind made me digest books and work them into my life like nothing I've ever been through before. And that was a really big deal. The other thing is, there's a real famous, popular, maybe that's not the right way to describe it, courageous idea that people who bootstrap themselves into success are the brightest and the best. And I don't believe that. I think that is not a smart thing. Bootstrapping means that you're going to pay for it as you go, all by yourself. And there's no business that is really successful that doesn't have to borrow money as an investment into their business or into themselves to do things. When COVID hit, it shut down the speaking industry, shut down a lot of things. I mean, as speakers, we had no place to assemble to speak. I was president at the time, and we had to reinvent ourselves and learn how to do what I'm doing right now, becoming proficient at speaking to a camera, and I can't see my audience anywhere. One of the things that I did, there was a small MBA, SBA loan or something that came out. I borrowed $18,000. $18,000. Well, what'd you do with that $18,000? I built a brand new website. I didn't build it. I hired somebody to build me a brand new website because I changed my brand. I also changed my brand. I also went through a certification of the Fascination Advantage certification, became officially certified. Now I'm one of the top 3 trainers in the world that trains the certification. I bought some apparel that reflected my new brand. I went to some conferences, joined some other things. What I'm saying is I borrowed money that before had been a real inhibitor because I didn't have the pool of cash laying around. And am I paying that back? Oh yeah, paying it back, no big deal. That is a financial inhibitor that a lot of people just won't go through. And I recommend that you look at it as an investment into your business, make a plan to pay it back, but build yourself to the place where you can earn the money back. You know, that's what that's all about, is that you borrow something to help you earn 4 or 5 times what you borrowed.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think, the best use of loans in general is that they produce more net productivity. So, if you're taking on debt to buy stuff that's consumable, that's going to decrease in value, that's going to get you in trouble.
Money is a tool. Money is a tool. It's not a luxury. It's a tool.
That's right. So you take on debt that helps you invest in yourself or your business and can produce bigger outcomes. That's the ideal use case for a loan or for, investment. So I respect how you did that. Tell me more about kind of, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that probably are wondering, what if I do want to speak? What if I do have a message to share? What if I do want to be able to make an impact more broadly than just in my company? What has that been like for you as someone who has such great experience becoming a speaker, a keynote speaker, and that's a paid part of your business, that in addition to being the change energizer and coming in and helping companies change, you're also helping inspire people. You're sharing a message and you're getting paid to do that. Tell the audience a little bit about what that looks like. What does that take, and how were you able to do that?
Yeah, there's some people who may seem to you that are just poetically gifted and they could speak on any subject at any time in front of a crowd or in person. Most of those people started off scared to death and didn't know how to organize their thoughts. Matter of fact, I was on I have a coach. I was on our inner circle session just before we got on. And there was one of the ladies who talked about how that she's an international trainer on sales. And she said she had this thing memorized. And when she got up in front of the crowd, she completely froze and didn't know what to do. So what did I do? I hired a speaking coach. Now I have a background of speaking. All my formal training is in theology.
Mm.
When I left high school, I had a calling on my heart to get involved in the ministry. So I went to a private college in Houston and actually won my first speaking contest at that college. And then I transferred to college in California. And I spent my 20s crisscrossing the country as an evangelist, church growth consultant, preaching messages and speaking. Now, I want to tell you, I feel so sorry for some of those congregations because I wasn't that great a speaker, but I had lots of passion and lots of practice. But about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I realized I'd never had a speaking coach. And so I hired a speaking coach to help me organize my thoughts, to classify my different presentations. Not long after that, a friend of mine said, I'm going to start a Toastmasters group, and you want to be one of the founding members? And so I said, yeah, I don't really know anything about that. I went to one once, and now I go to Toastmasters 2 or 3 times a month because I practice the skills, thinking on your feet and organizing your thoughts and putting those out there. And then I joined the NSA, National Speakers Association. The National Speakers Association is a national association with 36 or more chapters around the country that teach you the business and the craft of professional speaking. The difference between it and Toastmasters doesn't teach you about the business of speaking. And so there's not very many people in Toastmasters that get paid for speaking. They do it for their company. They do it for other things, charities, organizations. But in in the National Speakers Association, we're helping professional speakers to, in their business and getting speaking gigs, and learn how to speak to large and small conferences and small groups. So I'm been on the National Chapter Leadership Board for the last 4 or 5 years. I just rolled off of that. So I'm in the thick of it, and I'm practicing speaking all the time.
And you're doing great. I mean, it comes through. You're very clear in the way that you present yourself. You've got great energy. You know, when I look at some of the patterns underneath what you just said that maybe the audience can think about, really apply, it started with a calling and passion. And for you, that was in theology, but that could be in anything. I think if you don't have that initial passion, that initial deep conviction that you have a message that's worth sharing and a desire to share it, it's going to be hard to get traction in general. So starting with that, even though maybe you did some presentations where they had to sit through a novice speaker, at least you started with that. That's a great place to be. And then you added, these steps of building your skills, getting a coach, joining 2 different associations, networking, learning from peers. I think putting all that work and practice into honing your craft. Sometimes people look at that and they think that's all it takes. Sometimes people think you just need the passion and then everything magically works out. But it's the pattern of finding really strong reasons why. Like Simon Sinek talks about in Start With Why. It's big on having those deep motivating reasons. That's going to create the motivation to get you on the journey. Then putting in the work and the practice to own the skill, and then reaping the benefit of now speaking in, 9 different countries, all the states, all these things you've done. That doesn't happen overnight. And I think that pattern is really powerful.
Well, thank you. I have a saying that was introduced to me, I don't know, several years ago. I'm not sure who even wrote it, but this is it. And I live by it. Things may come to those who wait, but only what's left behind by those who hustle. I'm a hustler. For many years in my life, I felt like I was always waiting for the right opportunity. I was going to wait when things came together. I'm going to wait for somebody to call on me. I'm going to wait for somebody to ask me a question. And when I read that saying and I heard it, something switched in me, and I learned another word, and this word changed my life. And I know where I learned this one in Covey's book, 7 Habits, and that was the word proactive. If you're not proactive, that means you're reactive. Something happens and you react. Something happens and you respond. But when you're proactive, you take charge. You're not waiting on everybody else. You're proactive. You take initiative. You move forward. You speak up. Well, I know that through the Fascination Advantage, that's just my natural personality tendency. I speak up, I take action, I raise my hand, and it has opened doors left and right for me, and it can open doors for your audience as well. Quit waiting around. If you're waiting for a sign, this is it. Take action. Jump in. Get on that roller coaster. Go for it, because if you don't, what's going to be left behind is going to be picked up by those who hustled for it.
Scott, as I look at AI and kind of where the world is going technologically, one of my beliefs is that change is accelerating and that it will continue to accelerate. And what that means for most of us is that there will be certain things that used to be hard that will be easy, especially things like technical skills. Someone who doesn't know anything about programming will be able to ask the computer to create some software, create a solution, and it will happen. And that is going to take some barriers down. What I think it's going to do is it's going to shine a light on people who really have strong soft skills. They have the experience to be able to hold the AI accountable or get it to do the things that it needs to do. They have the soft skills to help people adapt to change, because you can have all the possibilities available in the world, but if people can't keep up, or they're too fearful, or they're stuck, then it won't matter that the tech is there and available. How do you see, for your business, what are you looking at with AI, and how are you sort of thinking about either using it in your business or teaching these skills and empowering people to be able to keep up with that change?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And it has helped to accelerate a lot of things for me. It helps with the creativity and the imagination. It pulls in resources from research that I've never even heard of. I consider AI, I like metaphors. I considered AI the icing on the cake. And you can use AI to pull up a bunch of stuff and take you into some directions, put some things together for you. And it makes great icing to cover a cake with. But when people start slicing the cake to find out what you really have, if all you had was AI and they slice into that cake, they're going to be really disappointed because you don't have what it took to get to that place. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And I think when you cut into the cake, what you're really doing there is you're uncovering what the substance is. And that really gets to the core of a subject that I know you have some expertise on, which is this idea of trust. And so if I cut that cake and it's all just empty and it doesn't taste good, and what's inside there is not what I thought it would be, well, now I don't trust you. What in your mind, Scott, is the role of trust in business, and how do you think about that concept of trust, either in regards to AI or in general?
Well, trust is a pretty important thing. And as a matter of fact, I do a keynote called Raising Your Trust Credit Score. It's the ultimate business accelerator. Covey, I don't know if you can tell that I'm a fan of his. He wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And in it, he said, when trust is high, the speed of business is fast. But when trust is low, the speed of business is slow and clunky and costly. I used to think that trust was just kind of a gut feeling, just kind of I trust them or I don't trust them. But he identified at least 4 elements. There's more than that, but at least 4 elements of intent, which is, what are your intentions, your motive? What's the motive behind what's going on? Integrity. And integrity means that what you see is the real thing. It's not a shiny gold object. It is a gold object. And that's integrity. Capabilities. Can you really do this? You said you could frame my house, but do you really know how to frame a house? You said that you could, do code on a computer, but can you really do it? Are you capable? And then the last one is results. Can you bring the results? When you're able to measure, people consciously or unconsciously measure those 4 things in us: that our intentions were good, that our integrity was real, what we see and it's what we get, it's a real thing. We do have the capabilities. We're either highly skilled or we're not. And then we can bring the results. They measure those consciously or unconsciously. I do a keynote so that you can measure them consciously. And for yourself, and I speak of me, I bankrupt my trust credit score at times in my life, and I had to rebuild it so that the trust that I had established and destroyed was rebuilt, and it had to be rebuilt on something that was rock solid, those 4 principles. So whether it's AI or whether it's just us in business, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're starting up shop somewhere, you're applying for a job, whatever it is, people are measuring our trust. We have a trust credit score with them, conscious or unconscious. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And I think one of the consequences of AI is it's proliferating content and information at a scale that's unprecedented. And what that does in terms of trust is it makes high trust more valuable. Having a high trust relationship increases in value because you don't know what you can trust. if all of a sudden half the people that I'm learning from, I find out it's just AI generated and actually it was hallucinating and that was wrong and it gave me the bad advice, or it used copyrighted material and then I repurposed that and then I got sued for it, and all these ways it could go wrong. And now I'm back to thinking, well, what can I really trust? And so, there's this concept that I love called the Pareto principle. I'm sure you're familiar with. It's also called the 80-20 principle. This idea that there's so much noise, and then there's a little bit that is really the signal, 20%, that's going to create 80% of the results. And as the world moves more towards AI, I think people need to think about, how do I be in the trusted 20% that can get the majority of results? Because everything AI brings to the table is going to be fairly commoditized. It's going to be table stakes. It's going to be available across the board. And so having that trust means you have more value than just that. It means you have something that's actually worth a relationship, worth business, worth long-term investment, that, like you said, across those 4 categories can be protected. And so it's critical that people right now are building, maintaining that trust credit score with their customers, with prospects, with the industry that they're in, because if not, you're not going to have a lot to fall back on when AI can replace some of the things.
There's something that I live by. One of the core values, one of the truths that I live by, that is, without exception, the truth always comes out. It may not come out this week or this month, but eventually the truth always comes out. And if, like I said earlier, if somebody, does something on AI, comes up with a bunch of stuff, and it's the icing on the cake, eventually somebody is going to cut into that cake and they're going to ask you penetrating questions. And you can't answer those penetrating questions. You're going to be found out. The truth, I believe in that. Now, on top of that, let me just say that one of the things that I found, and one of the things that I do that helps me a lot, is you have to know what questions to ask AI. And the better you are at asking specific questions that have to do with the meat of what you're looking for, then what it's able to generate for you is something that is really genuine. If you're not smart enough to ask it the right questions, you're going to get found out pretty quick. But if you're smart enough or curious enough to ask the right questions, then AI can give you an enormous amount of information. If your integrity is not right, and you're using things that are already copyrighted, somebody else's information, eventually the truth will come out. Now, I can't give it to you because I haven't looked into it, but in some of the workshops that I've been at, there are tools that you can load a script up into, and it will tell you that fast, this is AI generated. And so it busts stuff that is AI generated. And then, maybe you didn't have enough editing that you did to it personally, or you didn't ask it enough pointed questions, and all it spit out was a bunch of general garbage. I'm not interested in general garbage.
Yeah. That's a powerful concept. And it touches on really one last subject I'd love to touch on before we let you go. And that is, this power of asking really good questions is a superpower in many ways. Yes, it comes down to being smart enough or curious enough, but getting to the right question, the way I like to talk about that personally is, I believe that if you understand the problem well enough, the solution becomes obvious. And so understanding the problem means asking the right question. If I ask a bad question, I get a bad answer, like you said. And so there is a skill that has to be built through experience, through learning, through education, to be able to ask the right question, because a question does a couple of things. One, questions are really the power of thought. That's being able to think more clearly. It directs your thoughts and your focus. And once it directs your thoughts and your focus, that cuts out a bunch of things so that you can get to what really matters. It comes back to that Pareto principle. Now I'm focused on the things that really matter. And I've heard you speak about this in other contexts. So I want to just ask you, what tools, what strategies, for someone who's trying to improve it, asking good questions so they can focus and they can really do what matters. What have you seen to be most impactful in that regard?
Well, I'm glad you asked this. Number one, I'd had to learn how to listen. I'm a talker, and it doesn't come natural to me to listen. But in the Fascination Advantage personality profile, there's a personality type called Mystique. And Mystique are people who are naturally gifted to listen. And they're quiet. They don't talk much, but they listen. And they take in and they hear what's being said between the lines. So anytime I have a board or a team, I make sure there's a Mystique on my team. Because about halfway through the board meeting, I'm going to look over at the Mystique and say, okay, Mark, what are we missing? And Mark will say, well, I heard this and I heard this, but I didn't hear anything about this other thing. And I heard conflicting, and that Mystique will tell me things that I didn't hear because they're listening with a different set of ears. One of my mentors, Terry Schock, he told me several years ago, I'm a lone wolf. I have been, not as much. And Terry told me this. He said, Scott, if you want to get out there and go fast and just, get out there and go after it, go by yourself. And you'll get out there like a rocket, man, and you'll go do things. But if you want to go big and you want to go far, you're going to need a team. And I have come to discover that if you've got something big you want to do, you're not going to do it by yourself. You're going to have to leverage the gifts and the skills and the influence of other people. And I have learned to do that. And it has really accelerated my influence and the influence of a lot of other people around the world. It's a big deal.
I can't think of any better way to wrap up the show. Scott, if people want to learn more from you, connect with you, maybe ask you to come speak or do some work one-on-one with them, what is the best way to find you and contact you?
You can go to my website, scottcarley.com, C-A-R-L-E-Y, scottcarley.com. If you want to talk to me, book a call. Call the Energizer. Energizer is my brand. Call theenergizer.com. We'll put you on my scheduler and book a call with me. I'd love to hear about your big, scary, audacious goals. If you're planning a leadership retreat, I'd like to be on that with you. So yeah, I'd love to chat.
Awesome, Scott. Well, thank you so much for all the insights. It's been a pleasure learning from you today, and to stay in touch. Hey, before you go, I have a small request. Our mission is to empower as many people as possible to maximize their potential through the power of leverage. Could you help us in this mission by leaving a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube? And if you know just one person who would benefit from today's episode, would you please share it with them? Your support means the world to us, and we are thrilled to have you in the community. Thank you for being a part of our journey and helping us grow. You can find show notes for today's show and past shows at lessonsinleverage.com, which also has links to connect with me personally and connect with our various podcast channels across your favorite social networks. A big thanks to Solve.cloud, who sponsored this episode. They're a group of expert consultants that help SaaS and financial services companies to implement, optimize, and manage Salesforce.com. They can help you with custom integration solutions and are helping customers to implement some of the most important generative AI technologies. You can find them at solved.cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud is the URL. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.